next. If it's Friday, President Biden is set to launch his re-election bid, perhaps within days, as questions swirl around the investigations tied to his son Hunter. What it means as the nation barrels toward a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024. Plus, an abortion ruling is imminent. What are they going to do? The Supreme Court is set to decide the fate, either permanently or temporarily, of a widely used abortion pill after delaying its decision to today. We'll break down the potential verdicts and the latest legal, medical, and political fallout. And crime, mass shootings, and the political debate over how to keep our cities safe. I'm going to talk to one of the mayors on the front lines of America's gun violence epidemic right here in studio. Happy Friday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, reporting from Washington, where we're going to begin today with one question we expect most Americans don't want to hear. Are you ready for a do-over of the 2020 presidential election? Because right now, all signs are pointing to a Biden-Trump rematch for the presidency again in 2024. You have a new Wall Street Journal poll out this morning, which shows Trump has completely turned the tables on his closest likely Republican primary opponent, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Trump has transformed what they had claimed to be a 14-point deficit against DeSantis in December into a 13-point lead in April. Now, we can question whether that initial poll that showed DeSantis ahead was accurate then, but the movement is clear. This week, Trump has also run up the score on endorsements from DeSantis' home turf in Florida. DeSantis has just one member of the Florida congressional delegation on the Republican side of the aisle endorsing him. Donald Trump, the man born in Queens, has 11. As for the Democratic side, sources tell NBC News that President Biden is expected to make his re-election bid official next week. Perhaps it'll be done via video message as soon as Tuesday, which would be the 4th anniversary of his 2020 announcement. An official Biden announcement is likely to be the last thing necessary to scare off any legitimate primary challengers. He's got a couple of gadflies running against him. But still, the president is dealing with extraordinarily weak poll numbers and intensifying scrutiny into his family. Two sources tell NBC News that federal prosecutors have considered 4 possible criminal charges against the president's son, Hunter, tied to his taxes and a purchase of a gun. All of this comes as an IRS special agent is now seeking whistleblower protections tied to allegations that this whistleblower claims may have been political interference in the investigation into Hunter Biden. We will have more on that allegation in just a moment. But let's take the bigger question here. A Biden-Trump rematch in 2024. What's that election going to be? Will it look like 2020, when Joe Biden rode anti-Trump sentiment to victory? Or will it look like 2016, when Trump, despite all of his obvious warts and flaws, capitalized on an historically weak Democratic opponent? Check this out. We dug into our NBC News polling archives. Joe Biden's favorability numbers right now are pretty much in line with where Hillary Clinton's were at the dawn of her unsuccessful 2016 campaign. But right now, they're actually in better shape than when Biden started out last time around. Of course, the difference is Clinton's numbers went down throughout her campaign as it progressed. Biden's numbers went up as his campaign progressed. That 41% favorable rating that he has right now is about the same place that Hillary Clinton ended up in 2016, after months of attacks on Benghazi and her private email server. If President Biden faces an onslaught over Hunter Biden, perhaps, are his numbers going to slip even more? Or will Donald Trump's plethora of legal troubles and memories of the last 8 years level things out? Regardless, both Trump and Biden are less popular now than either one of them were around Election Day 2020. And yet both parties seem focused on nominating both men. Biden banked on high turnout numbers to edge Trump last time around. But the risk facing the White House this time is, if Americans are being served a rerun that they didn't love the first time, will they just change the channel and stay home this time? Here's the big takeaway. Unpopular candidates lead to unpredictable outcomes. And right now, both Biden and Trump are extraordinarily unpopular. With me now on set to break this down is NBC White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Also with us on the legal side of things is Ken Delaney, who has been following the various probes and has a little insight as to what justice is looking at into Hunter Biden. But Mike, let me start with the big headline here. When we say the president is announcing on Tuesday, what does an announcement look like? And what does the campaign look like, say, for the next 3 months?
Well, I think the President Biden you're going to see after Tuesday is going to be indistinguishable from the President Biden you've been seeing for the last few weeks, right? This is just an extension of what we saw begin with the ramp up to the State of the Union address, with the infrastructure, the investment tour, the CHIPS tour that he's been doing lately. The timeline of the announcement, yes, the president loves the symbolism, the sort of poetry of announcing on the same day he did 4 years ago. This is in part just about it gets really crowded in the months ahead, right? Most of the summer is going to be dominated by the debt ceiling battle, and this is more or less the best time for him to make it official.
It's the last window before the fall.
That's exactly
I mean, if
right.
you don't do it now, then you're sort of crowded out until maybe September, October.
And with an 80-year-old candidate, you do need to, I think they were starting to get a little wary of the questions about maybe he won't run, right? They wanted to dispel this very clearly. But this is going to look a lot like what President Obama's reelection looked like in 2011 when he announced he was running. What was his main sparring partner for that year? The Paul Ryan budget, congressional Republicans. We saw it in the Rose Garden today. Talk about your accomplishments and then whack the other side because they want to undo all of them.
Are they prepared to run only against Trump, or are they devising a campaign that they think works against a Nikki Haley, too?
Well, they think, I mean, there's a reason you hear President Biden talk over and over again about MAGA Republicans. Their view is that whether or not they're running against Trump, the candidate they're likely to face will be Trump-like because they're going to have to run like Trump in order to win the nomination. They've been watching Ron DeSantis very closely for the last few months. They do think this is ultimately going to be a two-person race in the Republican primary between him and DeSantis, and they are just really stunned at the degree to which they think DeSantis has traded away what was a good opportunity for him to make the case as a problem-solving governor. Yes, somebody with conservative bona fides, but they think he's only tried to run even further to the right. The abortion 6-week ban, especially the culture wars, they think he has made his general election case much harder to make, and he hasn't really distinguished himself from Trump.
I'm guessing 3 months ago they were very nervous about Ron DeSantis.
They called him a formidable candidate. They were watching him closely.
They feel less so today?
And they feel less so today. And they've always been confident it was going to be Trump in the end.
Ken Delaney, let's talk about what we know about Hunter Biden in that situation. We know there's a whistleblower. We know there's an IRS investigator asking for whistleblower protections. How much merit is there to that allegation? Let's start with that.
It's hard to evaluate, Chuck, because he's not providing a lot of details through his lawyer right now. He's anonymous. But what we know is that the Biden administration has said that this case will be handled by the U.S. attorney in Delaware, who is a Donald Trump appointee. But here's some context. Tax cases are different. So anytime a U.S. attorney wants to bring tax charges, he or she needs to get the approval from the tax division in Washington. Well, the tax division at the Justice Department is run by a Biden appointee. There also may be some issues around some of the charges we think are being considered for Hunter Biden, including 2 misdemeanor failure to file a tax return. What I'm told is that you need to file those charges in the place where the person lives. In that case, it may well be Los Angeles, in which case a Democratic U.S. attorney out there might have some say in whether these charges are being filed. And so those are 2 opportunities for Democratic appointees to have some input into this case. And that may be, I'm speculating here, driving what this whistleblower is talking about.
Ken, could this, I've always believed that at some point Garland was going to have no choice but to appoint a special counsel in all things Hunter Biden. Does this whistleblower moment make that more likely, or what's your sense in covering justice?
Well, here's the complication of that, Chuck. The investigation's been over for more than a year, according to our reporting. The FBI and the IRS both did a thorough investigation of this matter, and they turned in their work, essentially, to prosecutors. So I guess, in theory, you could appoint a special counsel and investigate it all over again. And I think you have a point. I mean, I think this does add a complexity to this, especially if, in fact, Democratic appointees had their hands on this case in some fashion. It's going to raise a lot of questions. So, and, you know, Merrick Garland has shown himself very amenable to appointing special counsels, much to the chagrin, I think, of the White House.
I was just going to say, Ken, once you start appointing special counsels, there's no stopping. Ask Janet Reno. It's one of those.
That's right.
Once you make that, once you automatically say, hey, we think there's too much politics here for us to be seen as credible enough to do this, then I don't know how you stop doing it, right? And this one just
That's right. Although the one counterexample here is they haven't appointed one in the case of Mike Pence having classified documents at his home, even though they did in the case of President Biden. So that was a line that Garland drew. We'll see what happens in this case.
Ken Delaney covering justice for us on that front. Ken, thank you. Mike, you get to stick around, but you get to be, you brought 3 friends with you, which I appreciate. Also with us, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Faz Shakir, Senior Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and Sarah Chamberlain, the CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Look, we got a poll coming Sunday. I'm not giving away the store.
We got a poll coming Sunday, too.
Great. I'm glad to see that we're all on different timelines. I swear to God, I thought we were on our own timeline on this one. But it's pretty clear that there's a pattern here, and that is this is Donald Trump's Republican Party, and Ron DeSantis has not figured out how to make the case against Trump that is somehow enough to peel Trump voters away. It screams it in this poll. I could tell you what we have. I'm sure you've got something similar.
You know, running for president is hard, and Donald Trump has done it twice, once successfully and once not, and Ron DeSantis hasn't. Now, he did have this big victory in Florida in his reelection. No question that's a significant achievement, but it is hard to see how he's built on that, and he's taken all this incoming fire from Trump, and it's had a toll.
You know, Sarah, look, there's an electability argument if you believe the Journal poll, and I do believe it in that sense, which is that there is that 6-point swing between Trump losing to Biden and DeSantis leading Biden. We know who they are. They're these center-right independents, right? That basically want to be Republicans and don't want to support Trump, and that's all that's there, and that's the big swing. But what Republican primary have you ever participated in that electability trumped policy, right?
None.
Exactly.
None.
Republicans don't seem to ever galvanize on electability.
They never do. They never do. And DeSantis, I mean, when he started taking on Mickey Mouse, it's like, really? That is not a win for him. And we've seen that in the polls. And that is why all of our members at Main Street have endorsed Trump, all of our Florida members.
What do you make of that? Is he more, I mean, is this
they think
more
he
about,
needs more time.
Is it just they view DeSantis as not ready? This is less about Trump and more about
Yeah,
that?
that's exactly what they're telling me it is. Yeah, they just don't think he's quite ready, though he's very good.
I got to ask you about, it says something to me that a former member of Congress decided to call up Politico, a Republican from Michigan, and tell you what he really thinks of Ron DeSantis. I'm going to put that up here. He never developed any relationships with other members that I know of. You'd never see him talking on the floor with other people or palling around. He's just a very arrogant guy, very focused on Ron DeSantis. I'm leaving out the curse word.
Okay, so the members tell me that he's not arrogant. He's just a quiet man. They said he's quiet. They didn't find him necessarily arrogant. And they just think he needs 4 more years.
The manner in which he's run the campaign thus far, he hasn't actually announced yet, is born of arrogance. I mean, it assumed that Donald Trump isn't the Republican Party standard bearer. It didn't assume that he's the guy who's the heir apparent to the nomination. It assumed that somehow I'm going to go around and talk to donors and I'm going to walk into this race and be the front runner. He never wanted to punch the guy in the mouth. You have the indictment come from Alvin Bragg. What does he do? Tiptoes around it, suddenly gets kowtowed into a position that I don't know if he even holds. And the whole thing has been born of arrogance. So he may not be an arrogant person, but what he emanates is arrogance.
Let's move to the idea of Biden-Trump and the impact on the electorate. You know, Mike, we've all been preparing for Biden v. Trump for a while. We've all thought, it's probably more likely to be that than anything else. But I don't think the rest of the American public realizes this yet. Has totally, and are we sure that they're all going to react the same way? I mean, I think, you know, this could be one of those cases where this isn't Godfather 2. This isn't the better sequel. This is the sequel that sent you home.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is whenever I talk to White House officials about the possibility of a third-party candidacy,
they panic, right?
They don't acknowledge that possibility exists. And our friend Mark Murray points out all the time that the margin for victory for President Biden in a lot of these battleground states was exactly more or less what
Gary Johnson.
Gary Johnson. I knew I was close.
It's a Johnson.
Gary Johnson got in against Hillary Clinton in a 3-way race in 2016. So that is a concern for them. But I think at the end of the day, what's interesting about the way the Republican primary is shaping up, remember with the announcement video Biden had in 2019, it was all about Donald Trump. There is no Republican argument about we need to get rid of Joe Biden. I think that's the thing that's interesting to the White House right now, is because the electability argument, maybe it hasn't worked before. It worked for Joe Biden. It helped really rally the party in a very crowded race behind him in the end, and it's not something that you're seeing on the other side now.
Here's something that though has to be worrisome to the White House, which is that in our poll that comes out Sunday, we put out one piece of it, which was we polled 600 Biden voters from 2020 and gave them just the names of the announced Democratic candidates, which include no credible challenger to Joe Biden. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., not a credible candidate, got 14% of Biden voters.
Yes.
And I don't think that demonstrates RFK Jr.'s strength, although he has a very famous name. I think that demonstrates a willingness among Democrats who supported Biden last time for somebody else.
You know, it's interesting. You'll appreciate this. Before I knew you want to jump in. The group of voters, and I won't get into the numbers here, the group of voters who are most concerned about whether Biden should run again are Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, progressive voters. And the most devoted voters to Biden in a matchup are those same voters. They're both skeptical whether he could do it, and they're going to stick by him if he does.
I would like to flash back all the way to the 2019-2020 primaries and talk about the fact that Joe Biden did not win New Hampshire, Iowa, and Nevada, and he still is the nominee. And what it suggests to me, and I've always felt, is that he's managing a divided Democratic Party. He knows, in some sense, he's a parliamentarian president. He leads a coalition. He's at his best when he understands that he's got a coalition to balance. And it's not as if he's ever...
By the way, the group of voters most devoted to him are African-American voters. You see it everywhere.
And they helped deliver that nomination.
That is his core.
That's right.
Which obviously you guys found out the hard way.
Yeah. But also that when you look at these numbers in the polls, he's always going to, in some sense, be underperforming his strength. He's stronger than the numbers show because he's a coalition by nature, president by nature. If you ask me, as somebody who's a Bernie Sanders supporter, do I love everything about Joe Biden? The answer is no. Will I vote for him? Absolutely, 100% yes.
I think that parliamentary way of thinking is smart here because Joe Biden is not popular. It's just what he likes to say, Sarah, don't judge me by the almighty, judge me by the alternative.
Right.
And there's Donald Trump and abortion. Those seem to be his two biggest assets.
And they are two assets for him, especially we live in the suburban districts, so we talked a lot to the suburban women, and frankly, they don't want either of them. They're like, why do we have two 80-year-old men running here, 80 plus? But those are two issues Republicans have to figure out how to talk about, especially women's health care.
Well, and on that front, Mike, we found that there is a group of single-issue voters, and there's about 40% of the country that's single issue on abortion, and it is like 3-1 Democratic.
Why did Democrats defy history in the midterm elections?
It's that.
Because abortion, and the White House and top Biden advisors think abortion is going to be an even bigger issue in 2024 than it was in 2022. And the reason why, what we're waiting for the Supreme Court to finally decide today, because that extends the reach of the Roe decision into blue states that have otherwise been protected by now.
How are they prepared? What is the political defense of Hunter Biden that the Biden team has?
So this is obviously an area where even Biden's closest advisors are very careful with how they discuss it because it's such a sensitive issue to him. But I think the thing that I hear most often is that Hunter Biden was attempted to be used against him in the 2020 race. We remember very clearly in one of the debates, the first debate, when Trump went after, and they think this actually backfired on him, that most Americans have somebody in their family, somebody close to them like Hunter, and they understand a father loving his son, warts and all, and that they think that is going to insulate him. The problem is there wasn't the legal cloud that you have now and the questions about whether or not he was protecting his son in the way. But I think the White House also views this as largely an issue that's been relegated to the fringes and cable news and not necessarily something that the average voter.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure I agree with that. When we poll our suburban women, they thought it was drugs and alcohol, which is very different than potentially tax evasion. So I think he is going to have a problem if all that comes out and it's true on Hunter.
Sarah, as you know, you live in the world of suburban districts. You also live in the world of pragmatic donors.
Yeah, sure do.
If Donald Trump is that, are they going to be searching for a third-party candidate? Some of those donors you talk with?
Some of them, absolutely, but they're not ready to go there yet. They're still in hopes that the Republicans will sort themselves out.
Also,
is there any progressive money interested in helping out a third-party ticket?
No, but I think that, the desires for third parties out of the centrist corporate wing, I think would obviously inspire some kind of reaction.
By the way, you'll laugh at this. There is this amazing coalition of people that don't want either. The coalition of voters that are the most not wanting are basically Chamber of Commerce Republicans and the progressive left.
Yeah.
And it's like they couldn't agree on anything else other than they don't want Biden and Trump. Is there any other issue that those two coalitions could agree on?
Right, I think they now self-describe probably, Chuck, as independents in large ways as well. They think of themselves not as partisan affiliated voters, but rather people who are making up decisions. And I think that's why, I've beat the drum, the economic issues will be the only area I think ends up becoming the zone of persuadable voters. of what might swing this election, because if you're voting on abortion of democracy and a lot of those things, I think you come into this election already knowing where you're going to vote. So then the economy is, I think, the wild card here. Well, because our polls, CNBC had this earlier this week. It's our same pollster, so I feel really good about these numbers, but a large majority of the country think we're headed to a recession this year. And we may be headed toward a recession, and that would be very bad news for the president. Recession's bad news for presidents, although maybe there's time to recover from a recession, even if there's one. On the other hand, Biden has been pretty consistent in saying he is focused on middle class and working class voters and their economic travails, and that will serve him well if there's a rocky economy. And also that there's going to be a default fight here, and that's going to help. Sarah, is there any political way that Republicans will benefit from this more than Democrats? Absolutely not. You see it as a loser? It's a loser. They know it. They will get this done. There's no doubt they're going to get this done. Oh, wow. You think? I'm 100%. Wow. We have you think McCarthy's doesn't have the votes for what he tried to put together, and that's dead, and then we're going to get some sort of convoluted... We have 91 members, the Republican Main Street Partnership. They have to get this done. Sarah, that's news. There it is. It's over. Sorry, Kevin. McCarthy still be Speaker McCarthy after that. Might be Speaker Scalise. I don't know. That's what we're going to find out there. Wow. Mike, Susan, Faz, and Sarah. Thank you for getting us started on this Friday. Coming up, and we are competing polls. Coming up, all eyes are on the Supreme Court again as we await that highly anticipated abortion pill ruling that could limit access to one of the most widely used abortion methods in the country. What to know, what we're watching for, and what could be the political fallout. That's next. Plus, guns in America. I'm going to talk to the mayor of Denver, Colorado, about what he's doing to keep his city and schools safe amid a rise in mass shootings nationwide. That's ahead. You're watching Meet the President. Welcome back. The Supreme Court is once again poised to rule on an abortion case that stands to have national implications, both for access to abortion and electoral politics. The court has a self-imposed deadline of midnight tonight to decide whether or not it will uphold a series of restrictions on a commonly used abortion pill, and if the court will take up a Texas federal judge's decision that stands to ban that drug altogether. Here's what we could see out of the court today, according to Laura Jarrett, who put all this together for us. The justices could grant the DOJ's request for a stay and return the case back to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to rule on. That would mean there would be no changes to mifepristone access for now. The court could deny the stay and send it back to the Fifth Circuit to rule, putting the Fifth Circuit restrictions on mifepristone into effect until that court reaches an overall decision on the case. So then you would have suddenly no abortion pill in the mail. Or it could decide to grant the DOJ's request and take up the appeal to the Texas case immediately. In that case, it is likely no restrictions would go into place until the Supreme Court hands down a ruling on the entire case. That route could delay things as far as next judicial term. Of course, there's also still a chance the court could once again buy itself more time before it makes a decision, or simply decide the plaintiffs never had standing in the first place. I'm joined now by NBC News Washington correspondent Michelle Sindor and Washington Post national political reporter who covers the intersection of abortion access, policy, and politics. It's Carolyn Kitchener. Yamiche, let me start here with this sort of what is justice preparing for? What is the most likely scenario they think is coming?
At this hour, it doesn't feel like there's anyone who really can say what this, what the scenario will be. What we know is that it's probably going to be it's at least coming down to the idea that it's more complex of a case than all of us thought it would be, only because of this extension. And talking to experts, you realize that this case, if it was easy, it would have been decided in the first deadline and not a new deadline being sent. That being said,
well, don't we also have the other district court decision from Washington State, which probably has created even more complications to their rulemaking.
Exactly. I will say that there is reporting that you see states, universities, pharmacies stockpiling already this abortion pill. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we should add that there's a generic maker of the mifepristone who is suing to try to stop the FDA from saying that their approval would be taken away with all of this. So there are a myriad number of court issues going on here. And the Justice Department, of course, it's in some ways preparing for whatever the Supreme Court decides. Mm-hmm. They've made their cases. They've said that they believe the FDA is, at the end of the day, the place where this should should be approved and that this would have sweeping implications if this drug, if the approval was taken away or even if it was curtailed and the restrictions were curtailed, because we've never had a case where the FDA has been told, well, this drug that you say is scientifically safe, courts disagree with you, so we're going to take this drug off the market.
Caroline, I want to get to the point. You know, the plaintiffs have not actually gone after the pill that actually induces the abortion. But they're actually going after the part of the regimen that actually eases the pain and side effects of the initial drug to women. So they're taking away a drug that essentially brings more pain and suffering to a woman that has medicated abortion. Is that the point?
I mean, it's hard to say, you know, why they're doing any of this. But, you know, I do think it's important to talk about that second drug in the regimen, misoprostol. You know, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are two drugs that go into a medication abortion. And in fact, you know, throughout much of the world, misoprostol is used alone to terminate pregnancies. And that is the one that they're not going after. So, you know, even if the courts were to halt distribution and, you know, basically take mifepristone off the market, there still would be this other option. But taken alone, you know, it is a lot more painful. There's more cramping. There's more bleeding. It's just a more difficult experience for patients.
And Carolyn, why haven't they gone after the drug itself? Is it because that other drug is also used to treat ulcers?
Yeah, I mean, misoprostol has been around a lot longer. It was, you know, originally approved for stomach ulcers. You know, and we don't know. You know, a lot of abortion rights activists are saying they're just starting with mifepristone and then they could go to misoprostol next. That's not likely to happen, I think, anytime super soon. To the extent that misoprostol would be affected, it would be through the mail. You know, if they rule in a particular way, then any abortion pill could be, you know, prevented from being sent through the mail, misoprostol or mifepristone.
Yamiche, you were referencing it, and there have been stories about how states like Washington State and California are stockpiling mifepristone. Are those governors thinking about simply ignoring a court ruling, if it's a court ruling that tries to essentially limit or even take mifepristone off the market?
I'm going to think that the Democratic governors are probably taking a little bit of their hints from the White House. And the White House has said they're going to go with whatever the legal standing is and they're going to follow the law. That being said, these governors are in these states and universities and pharmacies and women and all sorts of people that are stockpiling. They're in some ways getting ready for the fact that they might have to follow rules that they don't agree with. So I don't think the idea is that these governors would say, I'm going to ignore the Supreme Court, I'm going to ignore the court rulings, because we already saw the HHS secretary get into a little bit of a tizzy 2 weeks ago, a week ago, when he was somewhat suggesting that could be the case, and the White House came out and said, absolutely not, we will follow whatever the courts rule.
Carolyn, do you have an idea of how, let's say the scenario has the Supreme Court allowing the Fifth Circuit stay to go into effect, which would essentially eliminate mifepristone distribution via the mail? What's enforcement look like for that?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it would very effectively shut down a lot of these online abortion pill providers that have cropped up since coronavirus, since, you know, the FDA lifted these restrictions and allowed abortion pills to be sent through the mail. Those kinds of providers, which are doing a lot of work right now, especially in the wake of Dobbs, they would be shut down. So, you know, there's not really a way around that. So that would be a very, I think, significant blow to access right away.
Let me do a quick political aspect to this. Yamiche, Susan B. Anthony, they came out and basically criticized Donald Trump for not taking a hardline stance on a national standard. And they have set the marker at 15 weeks as the national standard. That doesn't, it's an interesting, I'm still trying to figure out, I think they're trying to figure out what their official pro-life position should be. And that's what they're trying to put out as a marker there. Is the party ready for that? Is 15 weeks satisfactory?
This is where I think the confusion and the splintering of the Republican Party is fascinating on this issue, because you have a number of different Republicans who are saying all sorts of different things, chief among them former President Donald Trump, who, of course, had the Supreme Court majority to get Roe v. Wade overturned. The other thing that he was saying is we want to leave this issue of abortion to the states. That's what the Supreme Court said last year. But, of course, as soon as conservatives and a lot of conservative groups got that win, they said, well, actually, what we really want is abortion to stop completely. So you have some Republicans and some people in this activist group who are saying we want a federal and national abortion ban, and we don't want to leave this to the states. So it's a very interesting thing. And, of course, look where we are. A year later, we're back at the Supreme Court with another case. So as much as they wanted to say, oh, yeah, this issue will go to the states, it's obviously not one that can only be resolved in the states.
Carolyn, do you get the sense that SBA has the juice to be the enforcer of abortion politics in the GOP?
They certainly do wield a lot of power. In January, Ron DeSantis met with the president of SBA. She's very influential. She meets with a lot of the governors and a lot of the people that are considering runs for president. And I do think it's a really good question, though. I mean, it's very clear again and again and again in elections that voters in a general election don't seem to want this. But I do think a lot of these Republican candidates are thinking about the primary. Yeah. And, you know, what Marjorie Dannenfelser of Susan B. Anthony List is saying is, you know, you can't make it out of a primary if, you know, you're, you know, quote unquote, weak on abortion nationally.
Well, look, I mean, what we all forget is most Republican candidates never have to actually face a competitive general election. Most Republican office holders never have to face an actual competitive. I think they're just not wired for it, and that may be why they're in this catch-22 that they found themselves in. Carolyn Kitchener of the Washington Post, Michelle Cinder on Team NBC. Thank you both. Before we go to break, our colleagues over at Telemundo had a wide-ranging sit-down with Vice President Kamala Harris, who had traveled to Miami. Today, the White House these days, she's the White House messenger on the issue of abortion. Now, she was in Miami for a climate event, for what it's worth. But today, in that interview with Telemundo, they did touch on the fight over abortion access and the administration's efforts to try to protect reproductive health care ahead of today's Supreme Court decision. Here's what she had to say.
On the mifepristone issue, it's politicians finding a court, targeting a specific court that they thought would be helpful to them, to take a medication off the market which was approved 20 years ago by the Federal Drug Administration.
Yes. So what are you doing to avoid that happen again?
So we are working on in terms of the litigation piece, and we're going to continue to do that. Plus, we have through the Department of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We have been issuing orders in terms of where it is legal, and right now it is, that pharmacies must comply with the rules. We have also been making very clear that a patient's privacy rights must be protected.
It's the entire interview that they have coming up at 6:30 p.m. on Noticias Telemundo. Up next, U.S. officials try to speed up Ukraine's ability to deploy new tanks to the front lines amid new concerns about Russian spying. We'll have the details next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The U.S. announced today it will begin training Ukrainian forces on how to operate and maintain U.S. Abrams tanks, and they're going to do that training in the coming weeks. And it comes as defense leaders gather in Germany in their ongoing effort to coordinate the assistance to Ukraine. According to the U.S. officials, some 250 Ukrainian troops will take part in a 10-week training program in Germany with the goal of quickly moving those tanks into combat. That announcement follows confirmation from Ukraine's defense minister that U.S. Patriot missiles have now arrived in Ukraine, giving the country yet another layer of air defense. And yesterday, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made his first visit to Kyiv since Russia launched its invasion, declaring that Ukraine deserves to be part of the defense pact. That's a big statement in Kyiv. But President Zelensky pushed for even more, reiterating his call for a fast-tracked admission into NATO. As tensions between Russia and NATO continue to escalate, my colleague Tom Costello, he went on patrol in the North Sea. He went on board a Norwegian ship that is looking for Russian subs and vessels disguised as fishing boats. Potentially, it was enabled to, these are boats that the Russians are using to spy on energy infrastructure that is vital to our NATO allies. Take a listen.
In the choppy, icy waters of the North Sea, The periscope from a Russian nuclear submarine peaks above the surface. A few minutes later, the entire Yasin-Shevardnetsk-class sub breaks into the open. On the conning tower, a Russian officer, as Vladimir Putin's Navy shows the flag just 60 miles off the coast of Norway. If the European economy has an Achilles heel, it is here, in the vast gas and oil fields that help keep European and British homes warm during the winter.
We're filming everything on the ship. We're filming antennas.
In April 2023, Scandinavian reporters went out on the water to capture these images of an alleged Russian spy ship.
There's two men staring at us. Wow, they're looking at us. This is really a strange situation, almost a tense situation. They're looking at us.
You can catch that full documentary, Sub Hunt, NATO on patrol for Russian ships. Catch it at NBCNews.com or on YouTube. It's some terrific work that Tom Costello and his team have been doing. After the break, city crime and school safety concerns. My one-on-one with the mayor of Denver, Colorado, Michael Hancock, is next. He's in town, and we've got him here on set. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Cities and towns across America continue to reel from continued senseless gun violence in their communities, from the shooting of 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, who mistakenly rang the wrong doorbell in Kansas City, Missouri, to a 20-year-old New York woman who pulled into the wrong driveway. There was a shooting at a Sweet 16 party in Alabama. 2 Texas teenagers shot after accidentally getting into the wrong car. As Congress and state legislators grapple with how to combat gun violence, Washington is set to become the 10th state to ban the sale of semi-automatic rifles after it passed their legislation on Wednesday. Meanwhile, in Colorado, there is a bill that would have banned the sale and transfer of assault weapons, but it did not make it out of the Democratic majority committee, even after the bill was pared down to only limit the sale of rapid-fire trigger activators and bump stocks. So joining me now on set is Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. You're in the last months or weeks of the job, right? 3 terms. How does it feel to be at the end of this run?
It feels good. It's been an amazing 12 years. But as we all know, politics are shifting, and I'm looking forward to stepping back and just see how things are happening around the nation.
Well, I like the idea of having somebody who's not worried about voters tomorrow, and means that, you know, you've got some perspective. You got to give advice to potentially your successors, mayors across the country. Are there enough gun laws to deal with the gun issue, or do we have more of a cultural problem in this country?
It's probably a combination of both, Chuck. I'll be honest with you. I think we need to address on a national level, and certainly in our various states, independent states, the issue around access to guns and how they are managed and secured and who gets their hands on them. And that's the reality. We have a gun violence crises in America, and it needs to be addressed. But we also have a cultural challenge in that we believe that how we settle things is with guns. At least our young people are maturing to a level that they believe that you need to have a gun to settle things. And just as you just did the rapid fire on some of the crises that we've seen across the nation, Denver has not been immune to it, and it's broken our hearts, quite frankly.
Let's say the state did ban assault weapons, like Washington State is, and I think Colorado is one of those libertarian states that leans left. Some libertarian communities lean right, some lean left, but there's some, and we've seen that. We saw Governor Hickenlooper had to back off from gun legislation. But let's say you did pass out assault weapons. Would it solve the gun problem in Denver?
No, it won't. And we never say it's the panacea, quite frankly. Every one of us recognizes we have to have sensible gun legislation, but we also got issues around mental health. Behavioral health challenges that we must address. We don't have a number of beds. We don't have enough treatment facilities. We don't have enough practitioners, clinicians. That we've got to address that issue. And America has fallen farther behind on addressing those who are dealing with mental health challenges. And as a nation, we must sound the alarm and address that issue as well.
I've heard this a while now.
Yeah.
What does we sound the alarm? What does it look like? Here's a pile of money, unlimited pile of money. What does mental health care look like in Denver if you had an unlimited pile of money?
I think it's the number of beds, increasing the number of beds and increasing the training and preparation, outreach, and encouragement of people go into the field of social work and behavioral health sciences, which is extremely important. We need a wholesale movement in that end. But we must also address the socioeconomic crises of America. We still have way too many disparities and that, quite frankly, can point immediately to the challenges that many of our urban cities are facing.
You know, when we talk about guns,
yes.
when we talk about homelessness,
yes.
I hear the same two words, mental health.
A lot of it, they're all interconnected. And many times, many cities, states across the nation can point to some of the challenges around access to behavioral health services and be able to predict the kind of crime and challenges they're going to have down the road.
You and Governor Polis didn't have a lot of fans in New York City with the migrants.
Yeah.
Any regrets on how that was handled?
I think there are regrets that this whole situation exists altogether. But yeah, absolutely. We felt like the governor made a decision to begin to move people based on where they said they wanted to go. We should have certainly done. I did talk to both the mayors of New York City and Chicago and say, hey, this is coming down the pipe. They've warned and shared with me their biggest concerns. Obviously, they're out of space. They are maxed, just like Denver was. And they asked us not to do it. And so there was some pre-work that we should have done even deeper and thought more deeply about it. But I'm going to say it again. This is a national crisis that the federal government has to act on. Denver, since December, we've seen some 6,500.
You need federal resources? Could you handle this if you had federal resources, and what would those resources be?
Federal resources. Shelter is one of the biggest issues we have, obviously. 6,500 people, $13 million on this
Think about
issue.
what you've said to me on all of these things. Beds.
Yes.
You need more beds to deal with
absolutely.
mental health. We need more beds to deal with migrants. We need
Right.
more beds to deal with homeless. Where are we getting all this housing and shelter?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that, I asked the federal government, I said, what facilities do you have that we can open up?
Yeah.
Warehouse, whatever you have that we can create a humanitarian situation for folks who are coming into our city. Anything would be helpful. And we got nothing. And that's unfortunate. And many cities across the country got the same thing. Ask Eric Adams in New York. Ask, Mayor Gallegos in Phoenix. Same situation.
Let me ask you a few political questions again. If you were given advice, I know you have not picked at least publicly, I don't think you've endorsed in the runoff.
Correct.
And I think I heard you say that you thought they're both very qualified.
Yes.
Give some advice. What's the biggest pitfall that they could fall into if they're not careful?
Well, I think you don't allow your next election to be your Achilles heel. People look for leadership, and I think that's what we've missed on the federal level until recently. I think Biden has done a great job. But I believe that people expect you to lead and even be willing to make the tough decisions, even when they don't agree with you. Lean in.
What's a tough decision that you think that was unpopular that you feel like, see, I told you so?
Well, I mean, I had to shut down the city during COVID.
Yeah.
And, it was a tough call because I knew I was putting people out of work. I knew I was going to disrupt people's livelihoods, disrupt businesses. But that's a tough call. I knew that I would rather rebuild an economy than to have to bury people. And we wanted to save lives.
President Biden have anything to worry about in Colorado? And what advice would you give him to make sure he didn't have any problems?
I think Colorado's a blue state now,
Okay.
pretty solid blue. But you know what? We still got a lot of issues that I think the president, no matter who the candidates are going to have to address in terms of
what does he need to
affordable
address
housing.
better that you think will reassure? There's a group of Democrats that are a bit skeptical that Joe Biden should run again. Mostly it has to do with physical health. So what do you think he could do to sort of reassure Democrats?
Yeah, you can put me in that category. I love Joe Biden personally and politically. But I want to make sure he's okay as well and ready and fit to serve.
Did you see him today?
I didn't see him today,
okay.
But I've seen him regularly and throughout his term and mine, and I'm a great fan, and I want him to be okay. So once he proves he shares where he is on that, then let's roll.
And you think he needs to be very forthcoming and transparent on that stuff?
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm a fan, and we just want him to be okay. But the issues that we need the president to lean in on obviously are crime, rising crime, housing, and affordability in our cities. Those are pretty universal across the nation.
Mayor Hancock, enjoy your last days in office, and don't be a stranger. We'd like
Always
to
good to see you, Chuck. You bet.
All right, thank you, sir. Still to come, the great stories of presidents and the sports they both loved and played. We're taking a look at how America's favorite pastimes have shaped America's most powerful political figures. My good friend and author Chris Cillizza is coming on set. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
I've sent a message today to the United States Olympic Committee spelling out my own position that unless the Soviets withdraw their troops within a month from Afghanistan, that the Olympic Games be moved from Moscow to an alternate site or multiple sites, or postponed or canceled. If the Soviets do not withdraw their troops immediately from Afghanistan within a month, I would not support the sending of an American team to the Olympics.
Welcome back. That was President Jimmy Carter going on Meet the Press, January 20th, 1980, formally announcing a plan for the United States to boycott the Summer Olympics in Moscow. It was a decision that generated controversy within the U.S. and consequences within the White House. By the way, there's still controversy about that decision. It's also one of the moments in which American sports and American politics intersects. And it's featured in Chris Cillizza's new book called Power Players, Sports, Politics, and the American Presidency. And Chris Cillizza joins me now. Chris, when I first got a hold of your book, I think I texted you, I was like, I wish I had written this book, number one.
That was a good response for me.
And it is amazing that there hasn't been a book like this. You know, there's been some golf books and there's been some specific books, but not about sort of the overall sort of the culture of sports in the presidency.
And it just seems, yes, look, I was surprised too and happy, candidly. Because the first thing you do when you come up with an idea for a book is you make sure nobody else has had the idea in the last 5 years, because, you know, it's not that original an idea. I think that sports and politics have sort of been running in these very similar lanes for a really long time, and I think we've been loath sometimes to our detriment in terms of analysis to acknowledge it. Carter is a perfect example. What you just played hugely backfired on him. Right? He thought that he could rally the country, rally the U.S. athletes behind this idea. And U.S. athletes said, well, the best way to show Russia that we're better than them is to compete against Russia and beat them. So
I got two words, Jesse Owens.
Exactly right.
I mean, that is what, in hindsight, like what he missed. Like, we're all raised and taught in school about how important that was for America to go to Berlin and show Hitler Jesse Owens. So it may, in hindsight, like, just takes basic history.
And who is at the 1984 opening of the games in Los Angeles giving a talk? Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So it shows you the difference in terms of how presidents understood what sports could do for them. Right. Reagan was not sporty in any meaningful way, but he understood what it meant to the country. The Olympics, having teams come to the White House after they won championships, that was Reagan who started that.
Who started the phone calls to guys in the
also
locker room?
Reagan. A lot of Reagan. And again, what's fascinating about it,
so
Chuck,
he
is
got it. The actor. But
totally.
That's the thing. He was the guy that understood what's the conversation people speak, and they speak sports.
Sports is a common language that is spoken in this country, much more so, I hate to say it because of both of us, than politics.
That's right.
You can talk to people about sports who you may have nothing else in common with.
Honestly, it's how I source build. It's always been in this business. How I source build, you figure out where they go to school, where they grow up, where they're from, you start, and then you find whatever it is, and you find the sport.
One great example of it, Richard Nixon, probably our most awkward modern president, honestly, sort of a loner, not good at small talk.
But he loved sports.
Nixon loved sports, and he was a fanatic about sports. He knew stats. He knew he loved to bowl.
We're gonna plug our buddy because a little cheesy to you. We're gonna plug our buddy Tony Kornheiser. But I heard your interview with him, and you went through this entire Nixon riff with baseball and a question about trying to figure out who his favorite baseball player was, and he gave you left-handed relievers and right-handed relievers?
So an AP reporter randomly asked, I think at the end of a press conference, randomly asked Nixon, like, who's your favorite baseball player? You know, and so Nixon goes with David Eisenhower, his son-in-law, Julie Nixon's husband. They go to Camp David. This is during Watergate. Okay, so priorities. They go, and he comes up with 4 teams. He comes up with 1880 to about 1930 when he was born, American League and National League, and then 1930 onward. And like you said, left-handed relief pitcher, specialist out of the bullpen.
Okay. Who was his favorite baseball player? Did he at least ever say it?
He loved Lou Gehrig. And part of that was because he had a relationship with Gehrig's wife. He reached out to Gehrig. He had a relationship there. And he loved the idea of sort of persistence in the face of struggle. That was sort of Nixon. Nixon saw himself in Gehrig.
So one of my favorite Bill Clinton days of the presidency, he got to one day early in his presidency, he threw out the first pitch at Jacobs Field.
I knew what you were going to say.
And he got to go to the Final Four that night to watch the Razorbacks win the national title. I just thought that was it's good to be the king moment.
And I have an awesome story in the book about that game. So he throws out the first pitch at Cleveland Indian Stadium at the time, Indians throwing out he then goes to the Final Four. Arkansas's in it. This is Scotty Thurman, Corliss, Big Nasty Williamson, Nolan Richardson.
40 minutes of hell.
40 minutes of hell.
Yeah.
Famous team. Clinton is so upset about the refereeing in the first half. He's gesticulating wildly in the box, and the camera pans up to him. So his aides have to say to him at halftime, Mr. President, you can't do this. You can't behave like this. But Bill Clinton is a fan. He is an Arkansas football and basketball fan first.
I will tell you this: the coolest game in GW history. Where I went to school at George Washington. John Calipari brings the #1 ranked UMass Minutemen.
Marcus Camby, I remember.
Marcus Camby to GW Smith Center. And Bill Clinton came. The sitting president just showed up, and there it was. He really did love it.
And I do think that it gets to something in someone that you might not be able to get to otherwise. And I think
just
it's
softens
so
people.
important.
It
It humanizes them in an important way, and that's what the book is fundamentally about.
I can't wait to talk to you more about this. People know we'll probably be talking on audio, and we'll see you soon.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you, my friend.
Well done.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.